I started noticing something strange about bridges a few years ago. Not modern bridges, but old bridges. The kind that appear in photographs from the 1800s, massive stone structures spanning rivers in cities across Europe and America. When I first saw them, I thought they looked wrong somehow, too low, like they were sinking into the ground, their arches half swallowed by the earth itself. I brushed it off at first. Maybe it was just the way they were built, I thought. Maybe people back then just preferred their bridges closer to the water. But then I started comparing photographs, hundreds of them, and thousands eventually. And what I found changed everything I thought I understood about our history. The official story is simple. These bridges were built in the 1700s and the 1800s, architectural marvels of their time, constructed by the civilizations we read about in textbooks. Stone by stone, they tell us, laid by craftsmen using techniques passed down through generations. But when you actually look at the evidence, when you examine the photographs with your own eyes, that story starts to fall apart. Because these bridges aren't just old, they're buried. Their foundations sit meters below current street level. Their lower arches are completely underground, filled in with soil and debris hidden from view. And nobody seems to want to talk about why. Take the Pont Neuf in Paris. We are told it was completed in 1607, one of the oldest bridges spanning the Seine. The history books paint a clear picture of its construction, commissioned by Henry IV, a triumph of French engineering. But look at photographs from the 1850s. Look closely at where the bridge meets the riverbank. You can see it clearly, the original street level, marked by architectural features, now submerged underground. The bridge sits in a hole. The entire surrounding city had to be built up around it, raised to meet modern street level. Historians will tell you this is normal, that cities naturally accumulate layers over centuries. But when you start measuring, when you start documenting just how much earth we are talking about, the official explanation begins to feel insufficient. We are not talking about a few centimeters of accumulated dust and debris. We are talking about 3 meters, 4 meters, sometimes more. Entire stories of these bridges completely vanished beneath the surface. I spent months going through archives, digital collections, old photographs from cities around the world: London, Prague, Moscow, St. Petersburg, New York, Boston, Philadelphia, Chicago. Everywhere I looked, I found the same thing: bridges with their lower levels buried, magnificent stone arches disappearing into the ground. And not just a little bit. We are talking about 3 meters, 5 meters, sometimes more than 10 meters of accumulated earth covering the original foundations. The patterns were unmistakable. This was not happening in one city or one region. It was global. Something had raised the ground level across the entire world, burying the original civilization's infrastructure beneath layers of mud and sediment. Here is where it gets interesting. These bridges were not built for the ground level we see today. They were built for a different world, a world that existed before the mud flood. Look at the proportions. When you dig down and expose the buried arches, when you see the full structure as it was meant to be seen, the engineering becomes clear. These were designed with the lower arches at ground level, providing passage for pedestrians and carts beneath, while the upper level carried the main road. Multiple levels of function, sophisticated urban planning that integrated the bridges into a complex transportation network. But now the lower passages are completely filled in, transformed into foundations for what appears to be a much shorter, less sophisticated bridge. The original purpose has been erased, buried under tons of soil. The photographs do not lie. In image after image from the mid to late 1800s, you can see workers excavating around these bridges, digging down to expose foundations that had been completely hidden. Contemporary accounts describe the surprise of engineers discovering multiple levels of stonework Below what they thought was the base of the structure, they found chambers, passageways, intricate drainage systems that made no sense for a bridge built at current street level. In some cases, they found entire rooms within the bridge supports, spaces that had been sealed off when the mud came, preserved like time capsules from the world before. And yet the official historical record claims these bridges were constructed exactly when and how we have been told. The contradiction is staggering. I started researching what could cause such a dramatic change in ground level. The official explanation is mundane, almost boring in its simplicity. Cities accumulated garbage and debris over centuries, they say. Streets were periodically raised to improve drainage. Buildings were demolished and rebuilt on top of old foundations, gradually lifting the urban landscape. Fire debris added layers, construction waste piled up. It sounds reasonable until you do the math. We are talking about raising entire cities by multiple meters in just a few decades. That is not gradual accumulation. That is catastrophic deposition. That is a flood of mud so massive it buried the infrastructure of an advanced civilization and forced survivors to literally build their world on top of the ruins. The bridges themselves tell us something else, something historians do not want to acknowledge. The stonework is too precise, too advanced for the technology supposedly available in the 1600s and the 1700s. We are talking about massive granite blocks, some weighing dozens of tons, fitted together with tolerances measured in millimeters. The arches are mathematically perfect, distributing load through principles of engineering that were not supposed to be formalized until much later. And the sheer scale of these projects, the coordination required to build them, suggests a level of organizational capacity and technical knowledge that does not match the pre-modern societies we are told constructed them. Think about it. How do you quarry, transport, and precisely place 100-ton stones without modern machinery? How do you calculate the exact curve of an arch to support that much weight without computers or even standardized mathematical notation? The official story does not add up. But here is what really made me question everything. When you look at the architectural style of these bridges, when you examine the decorative elements and structural design, they do not match the buildings around them. They are different, older, more sophisticated in some ways, as if they came from a different architectural tradition entirely. The cities that grew up around these bridges adapted to them and built to accommodate them, but the bridges themselves feel like relics from another time. They seem as if they were already there when the current civilization arrived and started rebuilding after the catastrophe. You see this pattern repeated across continents. Bridges that seem out of place, too grand for their surroundings, built with techniques that supposedly were not available yet. Accounts from the 1800s describe extensive excavation projects in cities across Europe and America. Workers digging basements for new buildings would frequently encounter intact rooms and corridors several meters below street level, spaces that had been completely forgotten. Newspaper accounts mention finding furnished rooms, sometimes with belongings still inside, as if the occupants had simply abandoned them when the mud came. Dishes on tables, clothes in wardrobes, tools left where they had been set down, personal items that suggested people had left in a hurry, perhaps expecting to return. These discoveries were common enough that they were considered mundane, barely worth reporting in detail. A brief mention in a local paper, maybe a paragraph about the curiosities found while digging a foundation. And yet somehow this has been scrubbed from our collective memory, relegated to obscure archive records that most people will never see. The pattern extends beyond just bridges. Look at any old city. Really look at it. Notice how the ground floors of ancient buildings are actually basements now. Their windows at ankle level, their doors accessed by descending stairs. Notice how cathedrals and old churches sit in depressions, surrounded by modern streets that had to be built up around them. Walk through the old districts of European cities and you will see it everywhere. Shops with their original entrances 3 meters underground, now accessed through modern doors cut into what used to be second-story windows. Buildings that look squat and compressed because their lower floors are buried. The evidence is everywhere, once you know what to look for. An entire stratum of civilization buried beneath our feet, hidden under the mud that supposedly took centuries to accumulate but actually arrived in a single catastrophic event. What we are looking at is not just architectural anomalies, it is evidence of a reset, a worldwide disaster that buried the previous civilization under meters of sediment and forced humanity to start over, building on top of the ruins of what came before. And these bridges, these massive stone structures that somehow survived the catastrophe, they are proof. Proof that the world was different. Proof that there was a level of advancement, a global infrastructure network that existed before the mud flood. The bridges connected cities that are now separated by buried roads and forgotten trade routes. I kept digging through photographic evidence, and I found something that made my blood run cold. In multiple cities, in photographs from different decades and different continents, you can see the same thing happening. Workers excavating around bridge foundations, digging down to expose the buried levels, and what they found were intact architectural features, decorative stonework, carved reliefs, sculptures that had been preserved in the mud for who knows how long, sometimes even inscriptions, though interestingly, accounts of what these inscriptions said are remarkably scarce. It is almost as if someone did not want that information becoming public, as if there were things written on those buried stones that contradicted the accepted historical narrative. Languages, perhaps, that were not supposed to exist in those places at those times. Dates that did not match the official timeline, symbols that belonged to a civilization we are told never was. The more I researched, the more I realized that this is not just about bridges. The bridges are a window into something much larger. They are evidence of a sophisticated global civilization that existed before the catastrophe, a civilization that built in stone, that understood engineering and mathematics at a level we are only now beginning to appreciate. And they are evidence of a systematic effort to hide this truth, to bury it not just physically under tons of mud, but intellectually under layers of historical revision and institutional denial. Think about it. If these bridges were really built in the 1600s and the 1700s at their current buried depths, that means the builders excavated massive holes, constructed the foundations below ground level, and then immediately filled the holes back in, burying their own work. That makes no sense. No engineer would design a bridge that way. No civilization would invest the enormous resources required to build these structures only to immediately cover them up. The labor alone would be staggering. Thousands of workers, years of effort, vast quantities of stone and mortar, all to build something underground that nobody could see or use. But if the bridges were built at ground level and then buried by a catastrophic mud flood, everything makes sense. The proportions make sense. The architectural features make sense. The engineering makes sense. The only thing that does not make sense is the official timeline we have been given. Accounts from the early 1800s describe the world differently than we imagine it. They talk about ruins everywhere, vast areas of devastated landscape, cities that were being rebuilt rather than built for the first time. Travel journals from the period mention strange features in the landscape, buried structures emerging from hillsides, stone foundations with no buildings above them. Explorers write about finding massive stone construction in places that supposedly had no advanced civilization. But these accounts have been reinterpreted, their meaning changed to fit the accepted narrative. When they talk about rebuilding, historians say they mean normal urban development. When they describe buried ruins, we are told they are talking about Roman remains or medieval structures. The words are the same, but the interpretation has been carefully managed to avoid the obvious conclusion that something catastrophic happened in the recent past. And here is the thing that keeps me up at night. If they lied about the bridges, if they buried the evidence of the mud flood and rewrote history to hide a global catastrophe, what else are they lying about? What other evidence has been buried, literally and figuratively? How much of what we think we know about our own past is actually true? The bridges are just the beginning. They are the crack in the facade, the thread that, when you pull it, starts to unravel everything. I started looking at specific examples more closely. The Charles Bridge in Prague, supposedly constructed starting in 1357. The official history is detailed and precise. We are told exactly who commissioned it, who designed it, how long it took to build. But the photographs from the 1800s show something remarkable. The bridge piers, those massive stone supports in the river, go down much farther than anyone realized. When workers did maintenance in the late 1800s, they discovered that what they thought were the foundations were actually just the middle sections of much taller structures. The original bases were buried under meters of riverbed sediment, the same sediment that buried the streets on both banks, the same sediment that appeared suddenly, in geological terms, covering an entire civilization's worth of infrastructure. Or look at the bridges in St. Petersburg. The city was supposedly founded in 1703, built from scratch in a swamp by Peter the Great. That is the official story. We are taught about the thousands of workers who died building the city, the incredible effort to create something from nothing in such an inhospitable location. But the bridges there tell a different tale. They are too old and too sophisticated for a city that is supposedly only 300 years old. The stonework shows techniques that match other ancient bridges across Europe, bridges that are supposedly much older, and, like everywhere else, they are buried. Their lower levels are submerged not just by river water, but by the raised street level that appeared after the catastrophe. The whole city sits on top of an older city, one that was already there when Peter arrived. Maybe he was not building a new capital. Maybe he was reclaiming an old one. I found records of bridge excavations in Boston from the 1880s. Workers repairing one of the old stone bridges discovered that it had 3 levels of arches, not one. 3 complete levels, each one buried beneath the next. The newspaper accounts describe the confusion of the engineers. They could not understand why anyone would build a bridge with multiple complete levels of arches. It made no structural sense according to their understanding. Why build 3 levels when one would suffice? Why waste the materials and labor? But what if those levels were not built at the same time? What if each level represents a different era, buried in sequence by successive catastrophes? Or what if all 3 levels were originally exposed, serving different functions in a more complex urban system that we can no longer even imagine? Water transport at the lowest level, pedestrian traffic at the middle, vehicles at the top. A city designed in 3 dimensions, vertically integrated in ways we have forgotten. The construction techniques themselves are mysterious. When you examine the mortar between the stones in these ancient bridges, when you look at the tool marks on the granite blocks, you find things that should not be there according to the official timeline. Precision that suggests machine cutting, perfect right angles on blocks weighing tons, surface finishes that would be difficult to achieve even with modern equipment, chemical compositions in the mortar that do not match period recipes, compounds that should not have been available that suggest knowledge of chemistry more advanced than we are told existed. Metallurgical evidence in the iron clamps and supports that indicate smelting processes more sophisticated than what medieval or early modern civilizations supposedly had. It is not that these things are impossible to explain individually, it is that taken together, they paint a picture of a civilization with capabilities we are told they did not have. I started connecting dots across continents. The buried bridges in Europe match buried bridges in America. Same architectural style, same construction techniques, same evidence of catastrophic burial, same proportions, same decorative elements, same engineering principles. This suggests something profound. Either there was global trade and cultural exchange at a much earlier date than we are taught, with ideas and techniques spreading across oceans we are told could not be crossed, or there was a single global civilization before the catastrophe. A civilization sophisticated enough to build identical infrastructure across vast distances. A civilization that was wiped out and buried so thoroughly that we have forgotten it ever existed. A Tartarian empire, perhaps, spanning continents, unified in its architecture and engineering, erased from history by those who came after. The timeline is the key to everything. We are told these bridges were built over centuries, each one a product of its local culture and era. French bridges built by French engineers in the French style. Russian bridges built by Russian craftsmen using Russian methods. American bridges built by American workers following American designs. But what if they are all from the same period? What if they are all remnants of the same pre-catastrophe civilization? That would explain the similarities. It would explain the advanced engineering. It would explain why they are all buried to roughly the same depth. A single global disaster would affect the entire world simultaneously, depositing similar amounts of sediment everywhere, burying everything at once. I found something in an archive in London that made me reconsider everything. A report from 1823 describing the discovery of a bridge buried completely underground. Not partially buried like the ones we see, completely buried. Workers digging a new sewer line encountered massive stone arches 6 meters below street level. They followed them and found an entire bridge perfectly preserved, spanning what had once been a river but was now solid ground. The river itself had been buried, filled in by the mud flood, and the city had been rebuilt on top of it. The report noted that the bridge showed no signs of being intentionally buried or demolished. It simply looked like water had stopped flowing one day and mud had taken its place. The stones were intact. The mortar was solid. It was as if the bridge had been frozen in time, waiting to be discovered centuries later. What kind of event could do that? What kind of catastrophe could bury rivers, cover bridges, raise street levels by meters across the entire world? The official explanation of gradual accumulation over centuries does not account for buried rivers. Rivers do not get gradually filled in with garbage. They flow. They carry sediment away. That is what rivers do. They erode. They cut channels deeper. They resist being filled. The only way to bury a river is with a catastrophic deposit of material, something sudden and overwhelming. A flood of mud so massive and so fast that it overwhelmed the river's capacity to carry it away. The more I looked into historical records from the early 1800s, the more references I found to unusual weather, to years of darkness, to crop failures and famines. The year 1816 was called the year without a summer. Frost in July, snow in August. Harvests failing across the northern hemisphere. People starving. Livestock dying. Riots over food. The official explanation blames the eruption of Mount Tambora in Indonesia in 1815. A massive volcanic eruption that threw so much ash into the atmosphere it blocked out the sun. But what if that is backwards? What if the volcanic eruption was a symptom, not a cause? What if something much larger was happening, something that triggered volcanic activity worldwide and also triggered the mud flood that buried the old civilization? I started looking at volcanic records more carefully. Between 1800 and 1850, there was an unusual spike in volcanic activity worldwide. Multiple major eruptions, not just Tambora. Volcanoes in Japan, Iceland, the Philippines, South America, all becoming active in a relatively short period. Earthquakes, tsunamis, all the geological chaos you would expect if the Earth itself was going through some kind of catastrophic upheaval. And right in the middle of this period, cities around the world are raising their street levels, burying the old infrastructure, building on top of what came before. The photographic evidence from this period is extensive, and it is all hiding in plain sight. You can find thousands of images from the 1850s through the 1880s showing cities in a state that looks nothing like the established, stable urban centers we are told they were. Instead, you see construction everywhere. Massive projects, entire neighborhoods being excavated, streets torn up and rebuilt at higher levels, buildings that look ancient being demolished or buried. Workers everywhere, thousands of them, digging, building, raising, covering. It looks like recovery from a disaster, not normal urban development. But we are told to interpret it as progress, as modernization, as the natural evolution of cities. We are told not to ask why it was all happening at once, across the entire world, in the same few decades. We are told not to notice that the timeline matches the geological chaos. We are told not to see the pattern. I look at modern cities now, and I see them differently. I see the buried world beneath the streets, the hidden layers of civilization that preceded us. I walk down old streets and I think about what is under my feet. Complete buildings, intact streets, an entire urban landscape preserved in mud. I think about the people who built those bridges, their level of knowledge and capability. I think about what happened to them. What kind of event could bury their entire world under meters of mud in what must have been a very short period of time? Days maybe, weeks at most, not centuries, not gradual accumulation, a catastrophe. And I think about why we are not supposed to know any of this, why the evidence has been so carefully obscured and the narrative so rigidly controlled. Every anomaly explained away, every inconsistency rationalized, every question deflected. The official history is protected, defended, maintained at all costs. Anyone who questions it is dismissed, marginalized, ridiculed. Not because the questions are unreasonable, but because the answers would change everything. The implications are staggering. If there was an advanced global civilization that was destroyed and buried within historical memory within the last few hundred years, then everything we think we know about human progress is wrong. The narrative of steady advancement from primitive to modern, the story of civilization slowly building over millennia, it is all called into question. Maybe we're not advancing. Maybe we're recovering. Maybe we're rebuilding something that was lost, trying to reach a level of sophistication that our ancestors already achieved before the catastrophe struck. Maybe the Renaissance was not a rebirth of classical knowledge. Maybe it was a desperate scramble to recover the technology and knowledge that had just been lost in the mud flood. And maybe that's exactly why this information has been suppressed. Because if people knew there was a reset, if they knew that advanced civilizations can be destroyed and forgotten, it would fundamentally change how we think about our own society. It would make us question our assumptions about progress, about stability, about the permanence of what we've built. It would make us ask uncomfortable questions about what could happen again. If it happened once, if an advanced global civilization could be buried and forgotten, what's to stop it from happening again? What's to stop everything we've built from disappearing beneath the mud tomorrow? The photographs are still there, in archives and digital collections, available for anyone willing to look. The buried bridges are still there, their foundations hidden beneath modern streets, their original glory diminished but not completely erased. The evidence exists. It has been buried, both physically and in the collective consciousness, hidden behind official explanations that sound plausible until you examine them closely. Once you see it, once you understand what you are looking at, You cannot unsee it. The bridges tell a story that contradicts everything we have been taught. And maybe that is exactly why nobody wants us to find them. Maybe the truth about our past is too dangerous to acknowledge, too disruptive to the carefully constructed narrative we have been given. Or maybe, just maybe, the people in charge do not want us to know that everything we think is permanent could disappear beneath the mud tomorrow. Just like it did for the civilization that came before us. The bridges are still there, waiting, silent witnesses to a catastrophe we are not supposed to remember. But they remember, and now, so do we.